White Lives Matter. 8-year-old London Thomas was at the store with her father inside a milk cooler until they were rescued by police.
I wasn't really scared. I was scared for my mom because I thought something happened to her.
But 65-year-old Celestine Cheney did not escape. She was shopping for ingredients to make a strawberry shortcake with her sister Joanne Daniels. They were about to exit the store when they heard gunshots.
People was running in. They running in, and I guess they ran over her. So I reached down to try to pick her up. And she said, go ahead, I'm coming.
Cheney was a mother, a grandmother, and cancer survivor. Her life is now a reminder to her sister to live.
I thought she was behind me, but she wasn't. So she saved my life because I was going to stay there with her.
Oh, my goodness, Jerika. Well, I know you spoke with family members of victims after they met with the president today. What did they tell you?
They said that they needed that. They know that the president's visit doesn't bring their loved ones back, but it helps. And the president even leaned in on his own experience with loss, telling the crowd that there will come a day when a memory of their loved one brings about a smile instead of a tear. Nora?
Jerika Duncan, thank you so much for your reporting. We want to turn now to the investigation as federal authorities are combing through hundreds of pages of the suspect's writings in the months and days prior to the attack. CBS News has learned that some of the writings include other possible targets, such as elementary schools, churches, and Hasidic Jewish communities. The postings also provide a detailed timeline of the shooter's planning. We get more now from CBS's Jeff Pegues.
FBI agents continue scouring the Tops grocery store, piecing together the shooter's movements during the attack. They are also poring over writings the suspect kept online. CBS News has reviewed the postings, which sources believe to be authentic. The writings run over 600 pages and indicate that he was radicalized and started planning 5 months ago. In January, the suspect identified the rifle he wanted to purchase. He was able to buy it legally, despite undergoing a mental health evaluation after making disturbing comments at school about murder and suicide.
He fell through the cracks, but he should have been put on the NICS and flagged not to be able to purchase a gun.
In February of this year, 3 months before the attack, he first mentioned the Tops grocery store, writing, "Damn, that is looking good." He called Tops Attack Area 1 and cited 2 other possible targets. According to the suspect's posts, he drove to Buffalo on March 8th to look for targets, got a speeding ticket, and even sketched diagrams of the Tops grocery store. Catherine Schweid, a former FBI agent who investigated mass shooters, says that they are nearly impossible to find online.
The internet is as big as the grains of sand on the ocean beaches. How do we collect that? What do we do with it?
The writings were found on Discord, an online chat room host where users create groups for certain interests.
Discord chat rooms are private and encrypted, which means your friends group, your interaction circle is unique to you. Discord and other people cannot simply scan and see the content in that chat room.
Sources say that law enforcement did not know about the writings before the shootings, and they need tips from the public to go searching.
Unless the American people get their head out of the sand and find a way to be aware of their children, their neighbors, and their coworkers, we're never going to solve this problem.
In those writings online, the suspect wondered why the FBI wasn't onto him. That was about 2 weeks before the shooting. The suspects allege writings speak to motive and will play a role in potential hate crime charges. Nora.
Jeff Pegues with all those new details. Thank you. And turning now to Sunday's shooting at a Taiwanese church in California, the suspect made his first court appearance today. Prosecutors say 68-year-old David Chu of Las Vegas was motivated by his hatred against Taiwan when he opened fire, killing 1 person and injuring 5 others. Investigators say Chu chained the church's doors shut and then used super glue to disable the locks before starting his rampage. We're also getting our first look inside the church as parishioners fought back and detained the suspect, preventing an outcome outcome that could likely have been much worse. All right, in a costly victory, Russia appears to have secured the Ukrainian city Mariupol today. Ukraine called on its soldiers there to stop fighting as a convoy of buses evacuated the fighters trapped inside a steel plant that's been repeatedly shelled during a months-long assault. More than 250 soldiers, some severely wounded, have been evacuated to Russian-held territory. Ukraine hopes to get them back in a prisoner exchange. All right, turning now to politics. It's primary day in 5 states today. Voters headed to the polls in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Kentucky, Idaho, and Oregon. CBS's Robert Costa looks at the key.
ABC News, the black boxes reveal that one of the pilots may have intentionally crashed that plane. ABC's Gio Benitez covers aviation.
Tonight, in a story first reported by the Wall Street Journal, investigators now believe the 737 that slammed into a mountain in China last March was deliberately crashed. Sources confirming to ABC News that officials analyzing the flight data say it clearly points to someone in the cockpit intentionally pushing the plane into a fatal nosedive. All 132 people on board were killed. Experts also cite evidence that the plane's landing gear was never deployed and the flaps were not engaged, both of which would have happened if the pilot or co-pilot was trying to land the plane. Investigators believe the near vertical descent, as seen in this video, would have required intentional force.
If you see a dive like this, that means somebody is forcing that airplane over. That's what indicates that this was not an accident.
According to officials, investigators also looked into the personal life and background of one of the pilots and believe he may have been struggling through certain issues that remain undisclosed right before the crash. The new details, a chilling reminder of the German wings horror in 2015, the co-pilot locking the other pilot out of the cockpit and bringing down the Airbus A320 in the French Alps, killing 150 people. That co-pilot had been previously treated for suicidal tendencies.
The most chilling aspect of this, even just with the initial speculation that it might have been a pilot who wanted to kill himself and take everybody else with him, is that it has happened before. Now, we've got to be much more aggressive now in the international community in finding out how we can make sure it never, ever happens again.
And David, tonight, China has not publicly said what it believes caused this crash. And tonight, Boeing does not believe that there is any mechanical issue with any of its 737 jets in service around the world. David.
Gio Benitez tonight. Gio, thank you. This evening, there is also a troubling new development in the baby formula supply crisis. We have learned this evening that 2 children were hospitalized in Tennessee after they were fed alternatives to the specialized formula they need and that their parents could not find. Here's ABC's Ariel Reshef.
Tonight, a dire consequence of that nationwide shortage. 2 children hospitalized in Tennessee after their parents were forced to find an alternative to their specialized formula made by Abbott.
They were dehydrated. I mean, they needed fluid. And again, because these kids have short bowel, it's not like you can just give them rehydration fluids orally. They needed IV hydration.
Doctors say the toddler and preschooler from 2 different families needed that special type of formula because of intestinal conditions. Both kids had an adverse reaction to a non-Abbott brand and blend. The hospital has run out of the formula they need, so they are treating one patient with fluids. The other patient was released after doctors adapted a formula designed for adults.
We had to take a formula that's not really designed for what we're using it for, and we've had to create some additions. The base is an adult formula and alter it to where it will work for the patient.
The Abbott plant that makes specialized formulas may reopen in 2 weeks after an agreement with the FDA, but it would take up to 2 more months to get their products onto shelves. And while the FDA is moving to import brands of formula not currently sold in the U.S., that could also take weeks.
And doctors say that changing formula for most kids is okay, but as we have seen for some kids with special health concerns, they may not be able to tolerate another formula. So doctors say that you should speak with your pediatrician or treating physicians to explore every option. David?
Yeah, this was really alarming to hear today, Ariel. Thank you. There's also news on COVID tonight. The FDA has now authorized booster shots of the Pfizer vaccine for children 5 to 11. The CDC expected to issue guidance later this week. Many doctors remain
longtime customer of Relaxium Sleep. And I'm here with my
congressional investigation into UFOs. Brett?
Chad Program live on the Hill. Chad, thanks. We'll continue to follow this. Up next, the panel on the Buffalo mass shooting, today's primary elections, and the economic situation in the U.S. First, beyond our borders tonight, the Spanish government approves a draft bill widening abortion rights for teenagers. The bill could also make Spain the first country in Europe entitling female workers to paid menstrual leave. The measures are part of a package of proposals that will be sent to the Spanish parliament for debate. New data obtained by the Associated Press shows nearly 1 in 25 people in a country in the Uyghur heartland, in a county rather, in the Uyghur heartland of China, has been sentenced to prison on terrorism-related charges. 1 out of 25. That's the highest known imprisonment rate in the world. In recent years, China has waged a brutal crackdown on the Uyghurs, a large Muslim minority, which has been described as a war on terror there. And this is a live look at Cannes, France. One of the big stories there tonight, the red carpet rolling out for the opening night of the Cannes Film Festival. The 75th edition of the gathering comes after last year's scaled-back version. Over the next 12 days, 21 films will vie for the festival's top award. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight.
Think is important from it? What, if anything, did we learn?
I think it's astounding that you actually said in your intro that that Congress held a public hearing about a Pentagon UFO program and about UFOs. That in itself, I think, is a huge deal. You know, this hasn't been done, as you said, in more than 50 years. The government has always in the past been super secret about all of this, any kind of investigation that they've done. And they got a little bit smacked. These Pentagon officials got a little bit sort of scolded by these congressional representatives today during this hearing about this, the cloak of secrecy that they've put over years and years of this this program, and told them, and one of the congressional reps, I thought it was very interesting, told Pentagon officials who were quick, you know, there were a lot of the things that they presented, they said, you know, we don't know what it is, but that doesn't mean it's a UFO. And they got a little bit scolded, you know, about not, about being too quick to throw their hands up and say, we don't know what it is, but, you know, we're not sure it's a UFO.
Let me, because you mentioned that, let me jump in to show one moment where the Undersecretary of Defense also gets into this whole, you know, enduring issue about what they want to keep secret. Take a look.
Do we have any sensors underwater to detect on submerged UAPs? Anything that is in the ocean or in the seas?
So I think that would be more appropriately addressed in closed session, sir.
And that's where that line of questioning landed. I guess the big question for you, and you're just trying to objectively report on it all, but did anything out of this hearing or these new videos raise the likelihood from the public evidence that these unexplained matters, these unexplained videos, could be something, or does it not feel that way to you at this point?
Nothing jumped out at me as an oh wow moment. There was 400 incidents were reported today, which is a big number. And that is because the Pentagon has finally opened the aperture and invited pilots, invited Navy crewmen to come in and show stuff. And they're trying to remove the stigma. What I find the most interesting has always been the interactions between fighter pilots and unidentified phenomena. We didn't see anything immediately new except for the sphere that you showed us earlier in your program. But those, to me, always end up being a little bit more noteworthy, I think, because these fighter pilots are the most stone cold. I mean, they're highly trained guys who are used to maneuvers, and they're used to all sorts of, like, they're very calm. They have nerves of steel. And when they start getting excited and reporting that takes them aback, you know, I usually jump up and take notice. And they've got some of that. What I really would like to know, no, we didn't hear that in the open session. I'm dying to know what went on during the classified session, and I think that's going to take a little bit of extra time to peel away.
Yeah, all really striking. We put this back up on the screen there. Helene Cooper, who's been doing the reporting on this, as mentioned. My thanks to you. We'll be right back on another update out of Washington. Stay with us.
If you could only eat one thing the rest of your life,
taken by U.S. military pilots. Well, the committee stressed the matter is a national security issue and that UFOs could be the product of foreign adversaries. Okay, Memorial Day, the unofficial start of summer, is right around the corner, and AAA warns a lot of people will travel. Nearly 35 million drivers are expected to hit the road. Air travel is expected to jump 25% over last year. Thursday will be the busiest. All right, coming up next, one woman's journey from cancer patient to world record holder.
If you can't watch the CBS Evening News, you can listen. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sponsored by Ancestry.
Success looks different for everyone, which means the path to success also looks different. For 75 years, University of Maryland Global Campus has helped.
According to the Kremlin, both Ukrainian civilians and troops were allowed to leave the plant after the troops surrendered and laid down their weapons. Ukraine's deputy defense minister says 211 troops were evacuated through a humanitarian corridor, and another 53 seriously injured troops were evacuated from the plant to a medical facility in Russian-controlled territory. Ukraine's deputy prime minister says they expect to carry out an exchange of Russian prisoners for the injured Ukrainian troops. All this comes as the Kremlin guaranteed the troops will be treated in accordance with international law. Joining us now to discuss what's going on, CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. General Hertling, thanks so much for joining us. Just how significant is this? How worried are you for the surviving Ukrainian fighters in Russian control?
Well, if we can't believe anything Russia has said in terms of the treatment of prisoners thus far, because they have not done so, they have shown us what they are. But secondly, you know, what I'd say in terms of the fighters in Mariupol, they have done a masterful job in terms of delaying and distracting Russian forces. Estimates are that somewhere between 12 and 14,000 Russian troops were involved in that action, trying to maintain the logistics supply from Rostov in Russia all the way to Odessa. And it took them almost 2 months out of their norm that they could not allow the Russian troops to move further north into the Donbass area to fight. So this action by the Ukrainian forces in the Azovstal plant, even though it was very troublesome and very worrying, a lot of casualties and a horrible condition, it really saved a lot of Ukrainians' lives if they pinned down those forces in that plant.
I also want to get your reaction, General Hertling, to part of what was said by a former Russian colonel on Russian state television on Monday. Listen to this.
Let's not wave about rockets in Finland's direction. This just looks ridiculous. The biggest flaw in our military and political situation is that we are in total geopolitical solitude, and the whole world is against us, even if we don't want to admit it. And we need a way out of this situation.
What did you think of that? Let's get a little reality check breaking through the Putin propaganda right now. What did you think of that statement from this former Russian colonel on Russian state TV?
Well, in listening to the entire clip, Wolf, that was just a small segment of it where he was dashing Putin's desires to divide NATO. It was a strategic implication. But I happened to listen to the entire speech by Colonel Kodornak, and what he basically did was a damning combination of every aspect of the Russian attack, from the tactical competencies of the soldiers and the generals, to the operational design of the fight, to the strategic requirements that Putin put on his forces. They were not capable of achieving those kinds of strategic goals across the front. And many of us saw that from the very beginning when you're talking about only allocating 190,000 soldiers, which seems a lot. But when you're talking about allocating them along 7 different axes of advance, along a frontage of almost 1,400 miles, with different military objectives to seize and secure cities of over 1 million, in one case 3 million Ukrainian population, it's just not capable of coming true. And I think Colonel Kodornak actually nailed it from the standpoint of addressing each one of Putin's strategic and operational and tactical implications on this.
General Hertling, thank you so much for your analysis. We are always appreciative. Coming up, an 8-year-old girl's bravery when shots rang out at the Buffalo supermarket. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Ready to style in just one step? Introducing new Tresemme One-Step Stylers.
1956.
This portion of the CBS Evening News.
This for months. They only swung into action now when all of a sudden the store shelves are empty. And truthfully, I just look at this and say, Americans are looking at this saying, are we a third world country? How we're the United States of America. I mean, are these stores like GUM, the Soviet stores that had nothing on? We're the United States of America. We don't have baby powder shortages. This is not what happens in us. This happens in third world countries. And this is Biden's responsibility because he's commander in chief. It's his job to fix it.
I mean, is that response, Mara, because they feel the outrage that's bubbling up across the country?
Look, this is a classic case of not everything that comes by a president's desk is his fault, but it's all his problem. In other words, he's the president. People expect him to solve these things. And yes, I agree with Mark. There must be some way to get baby formula onto the shelves. There are too few companies that make it. It's a very concentrated industry. One of these plants was offline for various problems, but I think something could be done.
I mean, hearings are to come. If the speaker is saying that, there are chairmen who are listening.
Remember your Rudyard Kipling, we all had plenty of money and there was nothing our money could buy. I think the scene of these shelves being empty is something that is very disturbing to Americans. We want to be able to have confidence that our economy functions, that we are able to fix supply chain issues, that we are able to respond to these things quickly. And as Mara said, this is something that ultimately, regardless of the people who eventually, I think, are hauled in front of Congress on this issue, is something that the president has to deal with.
All right, let's go to Pennsylvania. The GOP, the Senate candidates,
including loans for small businesses and low and moderate income.
Your wallet.
Purina One has the inside. Dementia patients have increased risk of death.
Except very literally by honey wheat bread.
So don't be.
Echoes to discover hidden objects.
I think Jake's off to a good start with the ladies.
So these members will vote yes on H.R. 6871.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Gentlelady from Texas. Gentlelady.
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Crayon Castro of Texas and Mr. Bowman of New York, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 6871.
Trumpism is now a kind of separate, independent force.
Yeah.
We're going to find out about that.
I mean, taking on Trump from the MAGA right is quite a take, Mark.
That is a problem, and this has shades of 2010, when the Republican Party was set to take back the Senate, and we nominated a bunch of people like Christine O'Donnell and Sharon Engel in Nevada, who had no chance of winning.
I'm not a witch in Delaware.
Yeah, exactly. But Barnett was on Fox News Sunday with Sharon, and she said, we were talking about the tweets where she called Obama a Muslim doing Muslim things, and she said, my tweets are not full thoughts or full sentences. I follow you on Twitter, Brett. Your tweets are full thoughts and full sentences. I try to make mine full thoughts and full sentences. Candidate quality is really important. I mean, putting aside ideology, extremism, if she can't answer these kinds of questions in a primary, she's going to get clobbered.
I got 10 seconds.
Shades of what we saw in the Tea Party, new blood coming to Washington. Regardless of who ends up winning, you're going to see lots of new blood, and it's going to change the Congress in significant ways.
Panel, thank you. My tweets usually end. Thanks.
By helping control your asthma, ZELENSKYY can.
O'Donnell in New York. Good night.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
SD.com.
Says otherwise.
Hey,
Next week.
Receiving some heavy damage due to last week's storm, and a community effort made it possible.
We've had a little rain around the Sioux Falls area today, but it looks like the clouds are trying to break up right now. Here's the evening planner. And we'll fall slowly to the upper 50s here later on this evening. Meanwhile, in Aberdeen, clouds are
The First Alert Weather Team, only on Dakota News Now.
Tonight, President Biden taking a forceful stand against white supremacy after the hate-fueled rampage in Buffalo. The president denouncing white supremacy as a poison after laying flowers with the First Lady at the supermarket where 10 people were killed, and meeting with victims' families. And the new details, the suspect's online rants showing the attack was months in the planning, his previous visit to the store back in March, and the other targets he allegedly considered. Also tonight, the baby formula shortage. House Democrats unveiling a $28 million emergency bill to address the crisis as U.S. companies turn abroad to find supply. How soon could imported formula hit U.S. shelves? News on COVID, the FDA okaying booster shots for children 5 to 11. And New York City raising its alert level to high. The victory for Russia in Mariupol after hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers were evacuated from a steel plant. Richard Engel in Ukraine. It's election night, 5 states holding primaries, including a wild race in Pennsylvania. Newly declassified video revealed at the first public congressional hearing on UFOs in more than 50 years. And the tale of triumph for a baby giraffe inspiring America.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. A solemn journey to Buffalo for President Biden today, meeting with some of the grieving families who lost loved ones in Saturday's supermarket massacre. The president and First Lady visiting the site, the president offering comfort and giving full voice to the anger so many feel over the racist ideologies that drove the attack that allegedly targeted black people. The president declaring white supremacy will not have the last word. This evening, a chill still sweeping across Buffalo as the pieces of the horrific plot reveal themselves. Tonight, what we've learned about the suspect's previous journey to the city, the planning, the alternate targets allegedly considered, all under the nose of an unsuspecting community. Emily Ikeda has new details for us tonight.
Evil will not win, I promise you.
Today, President Biden and the First Lady near the Tops grocery store at the memorial site for 10 people killed in a hate-fueled shooting rampage as they shopped on a Saturday afternoon.
White supremacy is a poison, and it's been allowed to fester and grow right in front of our eyes.
President Biden denouncing hate and again pushing for stricter gun control.
We can keep assault weapons off our streets. We've done it before.
And tonight, we're learning more about the 18-year-old suspect's months-long preparation for his twisted attack. NBC News has reviewed a series of online rants on the chat forum Discord, which appear to be written by the suspect, where he describes his reconnaissance mission at the store back in March, detailing how he mapped out the store's aisles, was confronted by a store security guard for repeatedly entering the store, and considered a school and churches as other possible targets he thought would have high percentages of black people.
You think you've seen the suspect before?
No, I know I saw him. He was in my store.
Rose Basaki is a produce manager at Tops.
He had said to me, "You're out of place here. You look like you belong out in the suburbs."
On the day of the shooting spree, she took cover in a conference room.
I could hear that then it was just like massive gunshots. Just massive, and you could hear them getting closer and closer and closer.
While nearby, 8-year-old London Thomas hid behind her dad as the suspect opened fire.
We all ran to the back, like at the place where the milk freezes at, and then he was shooting at the milk, and then the milk was like linking through the middle.
The staggering loss here is heartbreaking. Roberta Drury, Marcus Morrison, Andre McNeil, Aaron Salter, Celestine Cheney, Hayward Patterson, Catherine Massey, Pearl Young, Ruth Whitfield, and Geraldine Talley. Talley's sister describing her final moments shopping with her fiance.
He said bullets were actually flying by his head. And I do believe at that time, my sister was already shot.
Yeah, Emily, now a New York prosecutor is weighing in on how authorities responded following the suspect's threat at his high school last year.
Lester, that's right. The Broome County District Attorney says police and school officials followed protocols when they put the suspect in a mental health evaluation. He was soon released. Lester?
Emily, thank you. In Dallas this evening, a suspect is under arrest in the shooting at a hair salon in the city's Koreatown neighborhood last week. 3 women of Korean descent were wounded, and the case is now being investigated as a hate crime. Police say the suspect, who is black, suffered delusions and had received mental.
They have been keeping in contact with my
first bid for public office.
Of baby formula, House Speaker
will have to wait another month. Earlier today, the Minnehaha County.
She made the comment as desperation grows around the country. Here's Jolene Kent.
Tonight, growing outrage among parents as the formula shortage drags on.
I'm actually terrified. I don't know how I'm going to feed him.
The FDA facing new calls for accountability, one day after it struck an agreement with Abbott Nutrition to reopen its Michigan formula facility within 2 weeks. House Democrats are proposing $28 million in emergency funding for the FDA to restore formula supply and increase FDA staff for inspections. Did the FDA fail parents?
Yes, the FDA fell down on their job in terms of protecting babies and parents. And what we try to do with this legislation is to provide infrastructure and to provide resources and funding.
The agreement requires Abbott Nutrition to hire an independent inspector to evaluate the plant.
Rapid City could see a few more showers and 70.
Part of the country. Secretary McDonough agreed to do so.
Senator Rounds believes rural VA healthcare is being targeted.
Close the Wagner Clinic. It would shut down significantly the services being provided out at Sturgis. It would basically shut down the vast majority of the services in Hot Springs. And it would actually go so far as to eliminate the emergency room care provided in the hospital in Sioux Falls.
The American Federation of Government Employees says that Sioux Falls Veterans Affairs Union members and veterans will protest potential VA facility closures as Secretary McDonough is visiting. The Save My VA rally starts at 9 a.m. at Spellerberg Park, which is adjacent to the VA hospital. The DAV is encouraging all veterans to attend. In Sioux Falls, Beth Warden, Dakota News Now.
Beth, thank you. The municipal band is undergoing some changes in Sioux Falls, and you'll want to stay tuned.
Examples that they will say, sorry, that they don't have anymore.
Jolene Kent, NBC News, Los Angeles.
A real struggle for a lot of Americans. In Ukraine, one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war has ended. Hundreds of Ukrainian troops at that steel plant in Mariupol have now surrendered. It's a major victory for Russia, which now controls the city. Richard Engel is in Ukraine tonight.
In the end, hunger and injuries won out over bravery. More than 200 Ukrainian fighters bunkered down for weeks beneath the Mariupol steel factory surrendered to Russian troops. They'd fought even though they were outnumbered and surrounded as Russian troops bombed the city relentlessly, destroying a theater where hundreds of children were sheltering and a maternity hospital. The steel factory was their last holdout, their Alamo. But it couldn't last forever. The fighters, including many seriously wounded, were bused to a Russian-controlled enclave in Ukraine. Ukraine's President ZELENSKYY said combat operations in Mariupol are over for now. Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive. That's our principle, he said. The Ukrainian government said they'll be part of a prisoner swap. But Russia said tonight it's considering labeling the Ukrainian soldiers members of a terrorist group and will investigate each fighter for possible crimes against civilians. It appears to be Russia's way of pressuring Ukraine not to put more Russian soldiers on trial for war crimes.
The loss of Mariupol is a significant blow to Ukraine and a victory for Russia, which now controls its first major Ukrainian city since Russia invaded this country nearly 3 months ago. Lester.
Richard Engel in Ukraine, thank you. We're watching key races on this primary election night as a look to where the nation's political winds are blowing. A new NBC News poll finds 3/4 of Americans say the country is on the wrong track. So what does that mean for the midterms this fall? Dasha Burns reports from Pennsylvania.
How are you feeling?
Conservative commentator Kathy Barnett headed to the polls today, hoping to capitalize on her late surge in this tight Senate primary. Barnett made claims of election rigging and voter fraud in 2020, but a different message today.
Can the voters you're asking to turn out for you today trust this process and trust in the results of this primary?
You know what? We all have such a wonderful opportunity. Make sure you're coming out and voting. Don't allow anything to discourage you.
Her rivals in the race bringing big names and big money.
What if this? I'll give it to you.
Celebrity doctor Mehmet Oz received Donald Trump's endorsement, but hasn't been able to capitalize on it.
Why aren't you running away with this thing?
35 million reasons why I haven't run away with the election, but I'm in the lead and I will win on Tuesday. There's a lot of outside money coming in, people that are uncomfortable with an outsider like me.
Businessman David McCormick pushing his America First message, even as he's taken shots from former President Trump.
At a rally recently, he said that you were more Pat Toomey than MAGA. What do you say to that?
Well, listen, I knew when I get into this race it'd be rough and tumble, right? I knew the president would double down, and I think that's what's happening.
On the Democratic side, frontrunner John Fetterman casting an emergency ballot today from the hospital after suffering a stroke.
We're not different than any other family. We're facing a health scare like so many other Americans do.
His wife, Giselle, will headline his event tonight as the candidate himself remains hospitalized, set to have a pacemaker implanted. And in the race for governor, presumptive Democratic nominee Josh Shapiro off the trail. He just tested positive for COVID. It's the latest twist in a set of races going down to the wire. Lester?
Dasha, thank you. And for more, join Chuck Todd and Kristen Welker tonight for the Meet the Press.
If you could only eat one thing the rest of your life,
is in our future together.
The Sioux Falls Municipal Band is one of the oldest and most prestigious community bands in the Midwest and has been performing since 1919. Since last year, the band has been managed by the Washington Pavilion. Live from the Now Desk, Scott Ingen, Dakota News Now.
All right, Scott, thank you. Black Hills State University has the honor of hosting the Special Olympics State Summer Games this weekend, but before those games can start, the Olympic torch must cross the state. Today, that torch made its way through the hub city. The tradition of taking the torch across South Dakota before the state's Summer Special Olympic Games began in the late 80s. Students from Simmons Middle and Elementary schools cheered as the athletes and law enforcement officers paraded by this morning.
I know they love it. It means the world to them because they don't usually get that round of applause, but they deserve it, so it's awesome to see.
The torch will make additional stops in Redfield, Mitchell, and Huron today before ending Thursday evening in Spearfish for the opening ceremony of the Special Olympic Games. The full First Alert weather forecast is coming up right after this.
That his deal to buy Twitter cannot happen unless there is proof that fake and spam accounts comprise less than 5% of users. Musk said he believes the real figure is at least 20%. The Tesla founder offered $44 billion for Twitter last month, but he put that on hold last week. The head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, reaffirmed today that the central bank will keep raising interest rates until inflation declines. He also said that if need be, policymakers will consider moving more aggressively. The Fed already raised short-term rates by 0.75 percentage point this year. And on Wall Street, stocks rallied on news of strong retail sales in April. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 431 points, 1%, to close at 32,654. The Nasdaq rose 321 points, that's nearly 2.8%. The S&P 500 also added 2%. Still to come on the NewsHour, the United States grapples with the impact of the pandemic as we pass the grim milestone of 1 million deaths. Our student reporting labs reflect on how seeing negative stereotypes of Asian Americans in media can affect mental health. We remember the victims of the racially motivated mass shooting in Buffalo, and much more.
This is Outdoor Lights.
Being said, though, he also emphasized that for those who are trying to come to the country to seek asylum, he emphasized that they must not participate in this illegal crime and this activity. Here's what the secretary had to say earlier today.
Traveling from one country to another in the hands of smugglers, only to be met by the enforcement authorities of the United States government, is not the way to achieve relief. The border, the laws of the border will be enforced.
But despite the firm rhetoric, the numbers are not going in the right direction. We have new numbers in from the Department of Homeland Security confirming our reporting from last night. 234,000 migrant encounters at the border tallied in the month of April. National Border Patrol Council confirms to us that is a DHS all-time high. Other numbers of note, 113,000 migrants, 113,000 migrants were removed or expelled from the U.S. in April, but 117,000 were released into the country. And it's not just people pouring across the border. This is new video from the Department of Homeland Security. A massive tunnel uncovered in Southern California, over 1,700 feet long, 60 feet deep, with plenty of infrastructure, including electric and rail. $25 million worth of drugs seized in one single bus. That include cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. This is a problem that many along the border are talking about, not just the flow of people, but the flow of drugs, and which is why we hear a lot of people down here say they don't care what the answer is, they don't care what the politics of it has to be, they just want this to be under control. Leland?
Yeah, if you just think about the numbers that you put up, though, 50-50 chance of coming across the border, and if you get caught, 50-50 chance of getting released. Robert, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Just
wind. For tonight, clouds breaking up from west to east as the showers end. Upper 40s to low 50s. Tomorrow, we'll see partly cloudy skies in the morning in Sioux Falls, mostly sunny in the afternoon.
This is what we're seeing nationally. If we're seeing it in Pennsylvania and North Carolina tonight, what does it mean?
This isn't a shot across the bow of Joe Biden and the Democrats. This is a shot right amidships, and they're taking on water. You know, you look at first midterms after a new president, and that's what we got, a new president in 2020. This is his first midterm. That's always tough for the incumbent party, the party of the president. On average, since World War II, 1 Senate seat lost, 23 seats lost in the House. If that were to happen here, Republicans take back both the Senate and the House. But it gets even worse than that, because if the president's approval rating is below +5, and according to this poll that we just heard from David, it's -15, then on average in a midterm, the president's party loses 39 seats in the House. I don't have to remind my friend David Axelrod about 2010, wow. Yes,
when
the Democrats lost 64 seats in the House. Yes. That could be a good night compared to what happens this November.
Yeah. Wow.
I still have the tire tracks on my rear end from that. I remember it very, very well. That's not going to happen this time, only because there are fewer competitive districts than there were back in 2010. But look, we just saw the doctor giving his report on Lieutenant Governor Fetterman.
Ozempic isn't for people with update that for you tomorrow. But for tomorrow, things looking
of that race. John Fetterman has been out in front of polls. He's the lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania. However, over the weekend, he suffered a minor stroke. Today, his campaign says that he is having a pacemaker installed with a defibrillator. They say he should be able to resume campaigning, but we will see if that affects day of voting. Low turnout in Pennsylvania today.
Well, we certainly wish him good health, and we're glad that Rocky's paying close attention to all these races,
Right.
Lisa. Thank you.
He wants a treat.
For sure. And online, you can stay up to date with the latest election results from all 5 states that are holding primary elections today. You can find that at pbs.org/newshour. The battle for the city of Mariupol appears to be over after hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers surrendered from their final holdout. The city has suffered one of Europe's bloodiest battles since World War II. And now Russia appears to hold the entire Ukrainian port, its largest gain of the war. Nick Schifrin has the story.
Ukrainian soldiers wounded but alive and in the custody of their enemy. Russian TV showed its version of what appears to be the beginning of the end of the siege of Mariupol. A lonely procession of the wounded, some of the final Ukrainian holdouts from the Azovstal steel plant, what Russia today called a mass surrender. Ukraine admits more than 260 soldiers are being bused to Russian-controlled territory inside Ukraine. Some today arrived in the separatist-controlled Olenivka, on the site of a former penal colony known for torture and squalid conditions. They held out for nearly 3 months, living and fighting from tunnels designed to withstand nuclear attacks, many of them in the Azov regiment, born from a right-wing militia now integrated into the Ukrainian military. Their resistance prevented Russia from consolidating its gains, and today Ukrainian officials called them heroes.
Mariupol drew in the Russian Federation's forces for 82 days. Their operation to seize the east and the south was held up. It changed the course of the war.
An unknown number of Ukrainian soldiers remain inside the plant, but Ukraine today said their mission is no longer to fight. Today in Kyiv, those soldiers' families begged for their release, even into Russian custody.
They are trying everything to get them out. We try ourselves to help them in any way possible.
They eat once a day. We hope for extraction. This is what we're fighting for. I don't see another way out.
The city of Mariupol is a city in ruins. Ukrainian officials estimate a brutal 10-week siege killed 20,000 civilians and destroyed 90% of the city. The WHO warns it could now face outbreaks of cholera. The only videos of the city today heavily curated by pro-Russian separatist occupiers. Ukraine says residents are forced to work in exchange for food. But Russia's control of the city appears to complete its objectives in southeast Ukraine. Before the invasion, Russian separatists controlled territory up to about a dozen miles east of Mariupol. Today, Russian forces have seized a 500-mile strip along the southern coast, giving Russia a land bridge to Crimea annexed in 2014.
This gives Russia a corridor of land over which it can resupply and access Crimea, its forces in Crimea, its people in Crimea.
Kevin Ryan is a retired U.S. Army brigadier general who served as defense attaché in Russia. He's now a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center.
What's the significance of Russia being able to claim that it has seized all of Mariupol, including the plant?
Well, domestically for Putin, this is important for himself politically to be able to show that he has achieved a victory. Once the forces that are engaged in taking Mariupol are finished with their mission, those Russian forces can be directed elsewhere. They could go to the southwest and present a threat to Odessa, or they could be used to move up into the eastern part of Ukraine and to help completely occupy the Donbass region.
In the Donbass, Russian shells continue to devastate residential neighborhoods like in Bakhmut today. The top of an apartment complex ripped off and gutted. Among the wounded, a little boy, whom first responders fought to save. Ukrainian soldiers are fighting back with recently arrived American howitzers. Ukrainian officials say these weapons will allow them to launch counterattacks. But it's not easy to evict Russian forces from territory they occupied.
The size of the Ukrainian military versus the size of the Russian military just simply doesn't seem to suggest that they could kick the Russian forces out of the land that Russia already occupies.
And now that includes Mariupol. Its final defenders are today at the mercy of the Russian military. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
As so many have said, it is impossible to fully convey the staggering toll of this COVID pandemic. The statistical comparisons have certainly been noted. The deaths in the U.S. are roughly equal to losing as many people each day as we lost in the attacks of September 11, 2001, but for almost an entire year. It's also roughly equal to losing the entire populations of Boston and Pittsburgh. But numbers describe just one part of this, and each life touches so many other lives. Ed Yong of The Atlantic has been writing about this for more than 2 years, and he joins us again tonight. Ed Yong, welcome back to the NewsHour. One of the things you write about is how different mourning these deaths is from mourning other deaths that occur and that we have known. And you speak, at one point, you spoke about because COVID ticked off so many risk factors. What is that a reference to?
So the grief of many of the people who I've spoken to is incredibly prolonged, and it is what's called disenfranchised grief, which means that it's a loss that society doesn't really seem to acknowledge or validate. Many of the people I've spoken to who've lost loved ones to COVID, and there are some estimated 9 million across the country, never got to have the rituals that allow us to mourn our loved ones, to cope with loss. Instead, they faced a barrage of insensitive and judgmental questions. How did your loved one get COVID? Didn't they have some sort of comorbidity? Weren't they old? And then most recently, were they vaccinated or not? All of these factors have pushed their grief below the surface to a place where they can't process it, they can't deal with it. It's just, they haven't been able to go out and about and try and live their normal lives. And at this moment, when so much of those countries decided to go back to normal, it's as if this grief that has been placed in a time capsule has been released again. And so many of the people I've spoken to are sorrowful and raging all over again.
And you write, I mean, there's so much to ask you about, but you also write about how this mourning has affected COVID, and mourning those we've lost has been different for different groups of people, for the elderly, for those with disabilities.
Yeah, the million deaths that have been recorded have not fallen across the country randomly. They have been disproportionately concentrated among elderly people, among sick and immunocompromised people, among black and brown people, among poorer, low-income people. And that has contributed to, I think, our normalization of those deaths. So these were groups who were originally already marginalized before the pandemic happened, and they will continue to be marginalized in death as well as in life. Meanwhile, people who set the narrative, us in the media and political decision makers, disproportionately don't fall into those groups. They had the earliest and easiest access to vaccines and other life-saving measures, and they were quickest to then decide that the pandemic was over without really grappling with the massive costs that the groups that I mentioned continue to face.
You mentioned
San Diego Zoo Safari Park discovered the little giraffe suffered from a range of ailments, including hyperextended joints.
The biggest concern was her right forelimb. So the joint that's equivalent to her wrist was bending in an abnormal direction.
What would happen to her if she was in the wild?
And this probably would have been a life or death.
In came the Hanger Clinic, a group of specialists who build orthotics for humans.
This is the first animal I've ever worked with. It was pretty surreal.
They performed 2 procedures to fabricate a mold of Satuni's legs, the basis for a custom stainless steel brace.
All that engineering plus flair with the giraffe pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
And now, just 10 days after wearing the custom brace for the first time, Satuni is adjusting to roaming free.
Oh, she's thinking about it. Come on, darling.
She's back with her herd, healed, and as you can see, hungry.
It's absolutely inspiring, and now to see her back with adult giraffe living in a herd, it's just, it makes you almost emotional.
It was just the most gratifying thing I've ever done in my life.
The baby giraffe, who struggled with every step, has now hit her stride. Maggie Vespa, NBC News, San Diego.
Love a success story. That's Nightly News for this Tuesday. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
news is happening. Or order your next Chevy at your local dealership. Find new roads.
I know we made the better choice.
Our service comes at no cost to your family.
That's my question.
If we very limited here in the Sioux Falls area, if we get anything at all, there are actually a few more sprinkles out just the west of Sioux Falls. You can kind of see those there on KELO Live Doppler, but just sprinkles is all they are. The clouds will break up overnight, and tomorrow looks like a nice, sunny, warm day. A little breezy, partly cloudy in the morning in Sioux Falls, mostly sunny in the afternoon. 79 for a high.
That's our time. Thanks for watching.
Enjoy the evening, everyone.
Some clouds still lingering in the Sioux Falls area, but overall looking to stay dry the rest of the evening. Right now we're in the upper 60s and will gradually fall to the upper 50s by midnight and still remain mostly cloudy. In Aberdeen, the clouds will slowly clear out as the night goes on. You're in the low 60s right now and we'll be down to the low 50s as the clouds clear out by midnight. And in Pierre, some extra clouds for now, and you're still in the low 70s, and those clouds will be gone by midnight. It's going to be warming up for tomorrow with more sunshine, but we're tracking the risk for severe weather on Thursday. We'll talk about that coming up.
A local school district is back up and running after receiving some heavy damage due to last week's storm, and a community effort made it all possible.
But first, Governor Kristi Noem has been on record stating her daughter never received special treatment obtaining her appraisal license. A legislative panel investigating the issue says otherwise. Those stories and more coming up next on Dakota News Now at 6:30.
This is Dakota News Now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Wright.
I'm Andrea Anderson. A new report from the Government Operations and Audit Committee suggests that Governor Kristi Noem's daughter, Cassidy Peters, received special treatment when she applied for her appraisal license in 2020.
That report will be voted on for approval tomorrow during the committee's meeting in Pierre. Austin Goss gives us a look at what exactly that report says from our Pierre newsroom.
Roughly 6 months after the Government Operations and Audit Committee heard from the former head of the appraisal department, they have determined that Governor Noem's daughter, Cassidy Peters, received special treatment in getting her appraisal license. That information came in a report published by the committee. The report says that Peters entered an agreed disposition to correct work training deficiencies. Secretary of Labor Marcia Haltman removed the requirements for additional training, which the report says is the first time Haltman had ever done that in any agreement of the sort. The committee will vote on the report as a part of approving the minutes at their meeting Wednesday morning.
It'll be interesting to see the discussion around those minutes. Will there be a discussion or will we just approve them? And if we have a discussion, everyone at that point in time will be weighing in on their thoughts.
So far, neither the Department of Labor nor the governor's office have responded to requests for comments on the report. In Pierre, Austin Goss, Dakota News Now.
Taking a look outside now, and we didn't get to see a whole lot of the sun today.
Not really. Some clouds and some rain trying to make its way in, Tyler.
Sam and Andrea, the clouds really still lingering for a majority of us, and it's those clouds that kind of stuck around a majority of the day that actually kind of helped us a little bit to prevent seeing a lot of severe weather across the area. Right now, we still have a lot of clouds lingering, and for the most part, the rain.
Really what's important to those people down there, because we're kind of relying on each other for emotional, psychological support, help, friendship, literally our lives.
But the head of the Russian space agency, Roscosmos, is on another kind of mission. Dmitry Rogozhin, a prominent nationalist, is using social media to deliver a series of menacing, even nuclear threats aimed at his Western partners in the International Space Station. In early March, he tweeted a video of workers covering up partner flags on a Soyuz rocket, writing, "The rocket would look more beautiful." Scott Kelly fired back on his Twitter feed, "Your space program won't be worth a damn," he wrote. "Maybe you can find a job at McDonald's, if McDonald's still exists in Russia."
The reason I did it in the way I did it is because I wanted to get his attention. and it worked.
And then he fires back pretty quickly?
Yeah, he called me a moron. He said if the space station is deorbited or something, or if the program is canceled, it's going to be my fault.
A few days later, Rogozin orchestrated the release of a spoof video depicting cosmonauts closing the hatch to the Russian modules and drifting away from the station, leaving U.S. astronaut Mark Vande Hei behind, home alone. And Rogozin has repeatedly threatened to pull out of the space station because of Western sanctions aimed at Russia. But NASA leaders are not taking the bait. Kathy Leaders is the Associate Administrator in charge of human spaceflight.
Our flight controllers are still talking together. Our teams are still talking together. We're still doing training together. We're still working together. It would be a sad day for international operations if we can't continue to peacefully operate in space.
The U.S., Russia, Canada, Europe, and Japan have been doing that for the better part of 30 years. It was an ironic twist for Cold War space race adversaries. But in the early 1990s, Congress was balking at the cost of what was then called space station freedom. And the Clinton administration wanted to keep Russian rocket scientists employed for fear they might sell their services to the likes of North Korea.
It was essentially a merger between two human spaceflight programs in two countries.
Anatoly Zak is publisher and editor of RussianSpaceWeb.com. After the U.S. won the race to put humans on the moon, the Russians focused on long-duration missions on a series of space stations, culminating with the Mir.
Russian space program was looking down black hole, complete abyss, because there was no money to build next space station after Mir at that time. Suddenly, from nowhere almost, these two very complex projects were kind of merged together, and Russians benefited far, far more than NASA benefited from the agreement.
The International Space Station was designed in a manner that makes the partners interdependent. The Russian modules have the crucial thrusters to maintain the station's desired altitude and attitude and avoid collisions, while solar arrays on the U.S. side produce almost all the electricity.
It would be risky for the life of the station. Neither side would really be able to survive very well without the other.
Wayne Hale is a former space shuttle program.
We go on.
People with the word patriot in their tagline when they're 501c3s. And look, this is, to me, emblematic of the larger story that BLM has told us and why it's such a fraud. The numbers, if you look at every city where Black Lives Matter has been active in, the overall number of murders and violent crime has skyrocketed. Because the truth of the matter is this: Black lives were being protected in overwhelming numbers by police. And all of a sudden, when we decided, based on a few police officers who were behaving in a criminal fashion, and they were charged with a crime, that all police officers were bad, Jesse, you couldn't even watch cops on television anymore. They were offended, all of the BLM minions were, by the fact that Paw Patrol had a police officer. If you got young kids and you watch that, they were demanding that that be ended. This was all madness. We wildly overreacted.
Here where you see his gold pop up right there, that probably explains why statewide he has the number he has right now, but it's very early. It's a scattering, and I will just check to see if we have any. That is also, it looks like a little bit potentially coming from that 14th, from that district. I think they want me to wrap, but I just wanted to show you that's the beginning in the Cawthorn race.
Real quick before I let you go, I know we're out of time. Can you just go to the Democratic Senate race too to see if, where is Beasley standing in this early bit?
Yeah, I mean, she's the overwhelming.
Like
she's the overwhelming favorite to win. And let's see, when I say overwhelming favorite, this is about what we would expect.
So we'll be okay. That's what we'd be looking at. Beasley v. whoever.
Who wins that Republican nomination? That's right.
Very interesting. Steve, don't make too many plans for tomorrow night, my friend. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you. Excellent. Steve, cheers. All right. Of course, Steve will be tracking developments at the big board throughout the night at MSNBC. We know you love it. He's got the khakis and he's ready to party. We'll be back in a sec.
Makes sense.
Makes sense.
When are you gonna get out of your hair?
Yeah, just out the way.
A construction company, walked through, assessed everything. Once we knew we were safe to be in the building, then it was getting a game plan to continue on.
The Commons area still needs some work, and Lobnell says they won't be able to use it for at least a week, but students were more than happy to return to school, getting ready to finish the year next week and for graduation on Saturday. In Colton, Cooper Seamer, Dakota News Now.
Sioux Falls Mayor Paul Tenhaken is officially in his second term. He took his oath of office just a few hours ago in downtown Sioux Falls. Also sworn in were 4 city councilors. Incumbent Kurt Sale began his second term, while Sarah Cole, Rich McCorris, and David Baranco began their first term as city councilors. The municipal band is undergoing some changes in Sioux Falls, and you'll want to stay
for conservatives. But as Matthew Continetti explains in his new book, The Right, The 100-Year War for American Conservatism, the GOP has also historically attracted those with populist views, similar to what we're seeing today. Matt Continetti joins me now. Welcome to the News Hour. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So the book takes a much longer view than a lot of people who look at conservatism these days. Starts in the 1920s, tracking the evolution of conservatism to today. Why do you describe this as a war? What have you seen?
Well, a war is a way of describing really a struggle for dominance between two main groups. Intellectual elites on one hand, and then the populist grassroots on the other. And what I found in my 100-year study is that there have been times where these two groups, the elites and the populists, have cooperated, but more often there have been times where they are in conflict, where the conservative intellectuals, the conservative movement wanted one thing, and the populists wanted another thing, usually when it comes to the question of who should be the leader of this movement and of this party.
We're in that struggle right now, too?
No, of course, yes. We've been going through this struggle in many ways since 1992 over which direction the Republican Party should take. Should it be more nationalist? Should it be more globalist or more open to global engagement? But certainly since 2015 and the rise of Donald Trump, that struggle has been tilted toward, I think, the populist side.
You write about how, obviously, anti-communism was an early sort of organizing principle, right? If you said you were conservative, that was a strong part of your identity. That went away with the Cold War. So what are the organizing principles today? When someone says, I'm conservative, what does that mean?
Well, it could mean many things, precisely because that glue that anti-communism provided the movement no longer exists. So when I look at the right today, and you ask someone, you're a conservative, what does that mean? I think one unifying factor would be opposition to political correctness, opposition to the so-called woke ideology, especially when it manifests itself in cultural institutions. That seems to be a binding commitment that many people on the right hold today.
What about the potential overturning of Roe, right? Opposition to abortion rights has also been a core organizing principle. It's a 50-year fight. Conservatives could be winning. Does that take away an organizing principle?
Well, I think it would actually vindicate those on the right who have said that working through institutions could produce results. So if Roe v. Wade is overturned by the end of this Supreme Court term, that would actually be a win for the more establishment forces who are able to say to the populists, look, we took 50 years. We had victories, we had setbacks, but we worked our way through the courts, through the judicial process, through organizations like the Federalist Society, and we finally came out with a win, overturning Roe v. Wade. That, I think, would be a powerful tool for the more intellectual elite conservatives to use to reorient the movement more in their direction as opposed to the grassroots populist side.
It does take away one of those kind of rallying cries, right? That this is why we need to back our candidates because of this particular fight. And some of the other rallying cries we've seen gaining ground often now include a lot more of those sort of dangerous and ugly messages that used to be on the fringes and are now kind of finding their way more into the mainstream. Some of these even really dangerous, like white supremacist ideas, like we saw linked to the alleged shooter in Buffalo. There's really been no meaningful effort from leadership to condemn these kinds of things, though. So why not?
It was very important for the conservative movement coming out of World War II to really define the parameters of conservatism. For William F. Buckley, Jr., the leader of the post-war conservative movement, to say anti-Semites can't be a part of my conservatism, conspiracy theorists can't be a part of my conservatism, anarchists can't be a part of my conservatism. In the new era, in the social media era, gatekeepers like William F. Buckley Jr. no longer exist. And so it's incumbent on people to police their own institutions. And some conservatives have done a better job than others at that.
But we're not seeing that kind of gatekeeping even from leadership.
Right.
Right?
Well, I think there's a problem. There's a tribal instinct that kicks in, especially these days. So when Republicans or conservatives see the liberals in the media or in politics saying one thing, they instantly want to be against it. And there's a rallying behind the opposing idea. And you see that playing out now with discussions over culpability for this awful act in Buffalo.
When you talk about the populist movement kind of gaining ground,
because let's be honest, she does not have Trump's endorsement, but she is on the trail saying how much she supports him.
No question there. The Democrat John Fetterman, real quick, in Pennsylvania, a favorite there, had a stroke, just had a defibrillator put in place. Does that radically change things on Election Day, or do we just have to wait and see?
I mean, he's handily gonna win his primary tonight. At least that's what it's projected to be. We'll see how the votes come out. You know, obviously thoughts and prayers go out to him because that is a scary thing to happen, especially for a guy his age. I think, you know, he's tapped into something too on the Democratic side. He's a guy who shows up in a hoodie and shorts. You know, he wears sandals to debates. Like I like the guy. That's what I'd be wearing. But you know, like he's got to make it to the end, and that would be an interesting matchup. You get a John Fetterman versus a Kathy Burnett in the fall. And if you're the Democratic Party, you're feeling good about your Senate chances. You know, your Senate chances in keeping that seat in Pennsylvania. At least that's what it looks like today. But again, people like me have been wrong in the past. But this is why this is interesting to watch.
Yeah, and fun to cover. Scott, thank you. We'll see you tonight through the evening. Put a pot of coffee on. Coming up, how one city's fight to honor a country music hero turned into a felony investigation.
Into this. They kicked it over, and the FBI counterintelligence unit, which was at that time led by Peter Strzok, picked it up and decided to move forward with the investigation. Now, the FBI agent that testified today did not say whether Peter Strzok was the one who decided to move it forward, but he was leading the unit that decided to move the investigation forward at that time.
Very interesting. And is it true that a Clinton donor is on the jury?
There's alternates, and it's very possible that one may make the jury. We don't know who. We don't know who's an alternate, and we don't know who's on the jury because they've been spread out because of COVID. So it's very hard. There are 4 alternates, but the odds are that one of them made the jury are pretty strong. I sat in court yesterday, and it was incredible what we were listening to from some of these jurors. We had jurors. One juror said that she couldn't be impartial to the FBI because they dismantled the Black Panthers. Another person got on there and slammed the Durham prosecution has a political prosecution. We had people say they worked the phone banks for Clinton. Another woman said in 2008 her husband worked on the Clinton campaign. Another woman said she went to school with President Clinton and she will always be on her side. So it was very hard for prosecutors to find somebody who did not have a favorite.
Missed views is Kathy Barnett. And look, I do think that John Fetterman, should he be the nominee, is going to have to answer some of these tough questions. That's what political campaigns are all about. He's going to have to answer some of these questions. But, you know, ultimately, Joy, when you look at the big picture here, you look at Georgia, where it looks like Herschel Walker is going to be the nominee for Republicans. You look at what's happening in Pennsylvania. Republicans cannot get out of their way. This is traditionally a cycle that the party not in power of the White House does better. I think the House is, you know, Republicans have a much better shot in the House. But when you look at some of these Senate seats, Democrats are looking pretty good, from New Hampshire to Arizona to, you know, even to an extent Wisconsin, and of course in Pennsylvania. The Trump MAGA folks just can't get out of their own way. And when you have some of these primaries where you have a Trump-endorsed MAGA candidate and then someone who's even going more to the right of the Trump-endorsed MAGA candidate, that's where you've got some real problems for Republicans.
Well, let me ask you if you agree with that, Will, because how would it be that simple that a Barnett, Mastriano, those two on the ballot would make it that much easier for Democrats, or no?
Look, Joy, you and I both remember 2016 very well, and we remember how the Hillary Clinton campaign salivated against the prospect of running against Donald Trump, that they were going to use his sexual history and all his other past scandals, and they would destroy him. And, you know, instead, all these rural voters came out of the woodwork, and Donald Trump won Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes in 2016. And, you know, I have the same fears. There are voters out there who want to stick it to the system. They're mad about gas prices. They're mad about inflation. And if you can tell them, you know, look, this guy Mastriano, he might not count your votes. They say, oh, we don't care about that. We want change. You know, we want the guy. So I think you know Josh Shapiro, who's the presumptive he's the Attorney General and he's the presumptive Democratic nominee. He'll be running against Mastriano. He's run ads that kind of subtly have tried to promote Mastriano, that he wants to be his opponent. And I always think you should be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for. I want to note that Sherry Beasley is going to be the Democratic North Carolina Senate candidate. Charles Booker is going to be the Kentucky United States Senate candidate. It's going to be a historic year for African-American candidates, no matter what happens. Will Bunch, Adrian Elrod, thank you both very much. Up next, the right wing's almost unbelievable reaction to the mass shooting in Buffalo. We'll be right back.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Oh, 5 on the scale, so scattered severe storms will be possible. And that's why we've declared that a first alert weather day, at least in the Sioux Falls area. We'll be in the low 80s that day, but then by
massive her advocacy. Last year, when a family member of a state lawmaker was fatally shot, the 72-year-old wrote a letter to the Buffalo News calling for stricter gun control measures. A friend told reporters she would fight for anybody without a doubt. 55-year-old Aaron Salter was a Buffalo police officer for 3 decades. After retiring in 2018, he took up work as a security guard at Tops Friendly Market. Salter fired back at the shooter and is credited with saving lives. President Biden spoke yesterday about Salter's heroism.
We pay tribute to all law enforcement officers and their families who understand what it takes, what's at risk to save and protect all of us. That includes paying tribute to the Buffalo police officer, Aaron Salter.
Celestine Cheney, a 65-year-old grandmother of 6, went to Top Supermarket to buy strawberries. Her sister Joanne went with her, but survived.
My sister survived breast cancer and 3 aneurysm surgeries to go to the grocery store to get killed.
Andre McNeil, who was 53, was at Tops to buy a birthday cake for his 3-year-old son. His fiancée wrote on Facebook following the shooting, "Today my baby was born, but today my soulmate was taken. How do I tell my son his daddy's not coming home? How do I, as a mother, make it okay? Someone please tell me, because I really don't know." Margus Morrison recently worked as a bus aide for the Buffalo Public Schools and loved being around kids. The father and husband went to Tops to buy snacks for a family movie night. His younger brother, Frederick, told reporters, "It hurts me so much right now because I wasn't expecting to lose him." Margus was 52. 86-year-old Ruth Whitfield stopped at Top Supermarket after visiting her husband at his nursing home. Her son, a former Buffalo fire commissioner, remembering his mother.
We're devastated. We're devastated. We're a very close family. We're a very, very close family. And my mother was the glue that held us all together.
Geraldine Talley, 62, was a regular shopper at Tops and an avid baker. Her younger sister, Kay, told reporters, "We had so many plans together, so many plans, and everything has just been stripped away from us." Hayward Patterson went to Top Supermarket daily, offering rides to people for less money than ride-sharing services in the area. He was shot while helping someone load groceries into the trunk of a car. He was 67. 32-year-old Roberta Drury went to Tops to buy groceries for dinner. Her sister, Amanda, described Roberta as vibrant and someone who made the whole room smile and laugh. And Pearl Young, 77, was a proud grandmother of 8 who volunteered for years every Saturday at a food pantry run by her church. She had been working this spring as a high school substitute teacher. Pearl's niece, Jacqueline, reflected on her aunt's legacy.
She was a pearl. She was a gem. She was a precious jewel. And it reflected her name.
And our hearts go out to everyone who lost a loved one in that terrible shooting. We think it's so important not just to remember how they died, but how they lived their lives. And that's the News Hour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS News Hour, thank you.
To update your home, classic patio blocks are just 99 cents each after.
This idea of replacement and replacement theory are slightly separate. There may be people who might walk away from the idea of calling it a conspiracy, that Jewish people are behind, or calling it a conspiracy, that Democrats really are changing policy to make sure it happens. But the idea itself that white people are afraid of being replaced or being outnumbered is real, and it is ancient in this country. It animated the horrors of slavery. It animated the terror campaigns of Reconstruction. It animated the rise of Jim Crow. It made a reemergence during the Civil Rights Movement. You know, this guy, James Burnham, writes his magnum opus called Suicide of the West in 1963, in which he says, you know, that liberalism is, what do you call it, an ideology of Western suicide, because they would not go along with his idea of white nationalism. And we keep hearing people on television now talking about, well, this would live on the fringes of the dark web. No, this lived in the intellectual chambers. This lived in the ivory towers. Burnham was not on the fringes. Burnham went to Princeton. Burnham helped found the National Review. Burnham was the chair of the philosophy department at NYU for a very long time. You know, Pat Buchanan comes right behind him in 2012, writes this book called Death of a Superpower, which he said calls white liberals who are cheering the transformation of the country ethno-masochists and having a diseased heart. These are not on the fringe. This is not new. This is very old. This is very entrenched in conservatism, and it animates their voters. They are never going to walk away from that, because there is a whole set of Republican voters who believe that white people are the fathers and the mothers of the modern world, and if you were to take America away from them, you are taking away something that they created on their own. That's what they believe.
And this is the challenge, Dean, because it's the sort of soft pedal version of that is still the same thing. And Mitch McConnell does his whole, just doesn't answer it. But he knows that that's a substantial share of the base, whether they're the wild and woolly ones or just the regular ones. He knows that that anxiety is why people had such a bizarre reaction to President Obama. Your thoughts? I mean, John Gibson was on Fox in like 2006 saying people need to have more babies in Europe and the United States, because they're not keeping up with immigrants who are having more babies. Your thoughts?
First of all, this panel is probably giving some people white anxiety right off the bat. There's a Muslim 100%. And 2 black people on it, so they're probably freaking out right now, going, "Look, it's here. They've replaced us." The reality is, Tucker Carlson took the great replacement theory that Charles talks about and mainstreamed it. He put it on national TV nightly, over and over and over again. So people on the fringes felt emboldened. They go, "Well, if he can talk about it, we can talk about it." It's why Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and others on the right have embraced it. And let's take a step back. Imagine, Joy, a Muslim American radio host like me or other Muslim Americans in the media said that Muslims are going to be replaced by white people. They want to destroy our culture, civilization. And then Muslims commit terrorist attacks against white people, citing that philosophy. What do you think would happen to that Muslim American? You think they'd stay on the air? They'd be in prison. There'd be drone strikes against them. But Tucker Carlson can literally radicalize people, and the right won't talk about it. Let's remember, Donald Trump said, you got to say the thing. It's radical Islamic terrorism. If you don't name it, you can't solve it. They won't say white supremacist terrorism. I dare you, Republicans, say it. White supremacist terrorism. You won't, because it's your base, and we all know it.
And this is the case despite the fact, Charles, that it's something like 78% of the murders that were committed against, here it is, this is murders connected to political extremism from 2012 through 2021. White supremacy was responsible for 55% of them. 14% anti-government, 6% other right-wing. Islamists ain't even close.
Not at all. I mean, this is staring all of us directly in the face, and as Dean was pointing out, no one wants to say what it is. And you know, I don't think that even, I know Republicans don't want to say it, I don't think that even liberals, Democrats say it enough. That
Liz Cheney says it more.
Men, yes, young white men, this group of them, a small group of them, but a group of them, have become domestic terrorists, and they are young. You know, most of these men, I was looking at all the ages, they don't even crack 30. Right? We always think about them as old people. These are young, white, domestic
who are being radicalized online and, yes, I'm sorry, on cable news. Charles Blow, Dean Obeidallah, we got to have you guys come back and talk about this some more. Thank you both very much. That's Tonight's Readout. All In with Chris A starts now.
This is a Fox News alert. Polls have just closed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There's a very intense primary underway there on the Republican side, you may have heard. Primaries in 4 other states are wrapping up as well. We're going to have the up-to-the-moment election results throughout the show, and of course tonight on Fox News. But first, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Last May, a 17-year-old high school senior called Peyton Gendron received an assignment in his economics class. The assignment asked, "What do you want to do when you retire?" He answered, "Commit murder-suicide." Gendron's teacher immediately reported his threat to authorities, who sent him to the emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation. Gendron was there for just 20 hours. As he wrote later in his diary, quote, "I got out of it because I stuck with the story that I was getting out of class and I just stupidly wrote that down. That's the reason I believe I am still able to purchase guns." But he was lying. Gendron's intention to commit mass murder was, as he later wrote, quote, "not a joke. I wrote that down because that's what I was planning to do." And he was. Peyton Gendron was mentally ill. His classmates knew that. Gendron made strange facial expressions and said odd things in class. Last year, he showed up for school for a full week wearing a hazmat suit. Boots, gloves, everything, recalled another student. Police and school administrators understood perfectly well that Gendron was potentially dangerous. That's why they sent him to the psych ward. Even his own parents must have known that something was very wrong. Gendron's diary describes how his mother helped him bury a cat he had beaten to death in their garage and then beheaded with a hatchet. On Saturday, Peyton Gendron, as you know, finally did what he said he would do. He committed mass murder. He opened fire on a crowd of strangers in a Buffalo supermarket. He murdered 10 of them. So how did the adults around him let this happen? In a country with functioning leadership, we would be asking that question. The signs of mental illness were certainly there. The people in charge missed those signs or didn't take them seriously enough or weren't paying close enough attention. In any case, they didn't fix it. They let a killer slip through. So what did they do wrong with Peyton Gendron, and how can we learn from it? We should learn from it if we want to prevent more mass murders. But that's not at all what our leaders are asking tonight, hardly. Instead, they're asking the only question that ever occurs to them. How exactly can I benefit from this? How can I leverage this tragedy to my advantage? How can other people's suffering make me more powerful? It didn't take
from his hospital room, where he is recovering after suffering a stroke on Friday. Fetterman also underwent a procedure.
Pennsylvania, specifically in Philadelphia. Wolf, tell us what's going on there.
You know, Jake, we're following all the key races in Pennsylvania tonight, including the Republican contest for governor. CNN's Melanie Zanona is at the campaign headquarters of the Trump-backed candidate, Doug Mastriano. Melanie, there's some finger-pointing happening among Pennsylvania Republicans tonight. Update our viewers. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, the polls have only just now closed, but the blame game among Republicans is already starting to heat up. For weeks, the frontrunner in this race has been State Senator Doug Mastriano. He has made lies about the 2020 election a centerpiece of his campaign, and some Republicans fear that he is too extreme to win this key battleground state come November. Privately, Republicans are pointing a finger at the state party organization for not endorsing a candidate and for allowing this vacuum to emerge. One GOP operative said it was foolish and said, quote, everyone is collectively losing their minds here. But one person who was not shy about getting into this race, Donald Trump. He endorsed Mastriano in the 11th hour over the weekend. That was a huge boost for Mastriano. But look, the stakes are high here. The governor is allowed to appoint whoever oversees the state elections. And so this race has implications beyond 2022. Wolf.
Interesting point. Thanks very much for that. I want to bring in Casey Hunt, Michael Smerconish. They're going to be with me assessing what's going on. Both of you guys are Pennsylvania natives, so you know a lot about this state. There seems to be a lot of unconventional candidates, Michael, right now who are gaining some traction. Tell us about that.
Well, I would say that one of the reasons that you can gain traction as an unconventional candidate in Pennsylvania is because we are one of 9 closed primary states. I am one of 1.4 million Pennsylvanians shut out of this election today. Very frustrating for me because it's so darn exciting. And I think that rewards passion, meaning you get the fringes in both parties who come out and dominate primary elections. For example, I don't think that the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate who will win tonight, in all likelihood, John Fetterman, is necessarily the strongest general election candidate, and nor do I feel that way about Doug Mastriano, the likely Republican who will win the gubernatorial race. But passion rules the roost, and that's what you're about to see.
Well, and one thing too, Wolf, I have to say, so I've done a lot of years, I often go to, in particular, Walmart parking lots to talk to voters. So I did that a couple days ago in York, Pennsylvania, which is a pretty red county, but it does have a contingent of Democrats. I was there for a John Fetterman event, and usually you get a mix of, you know, you can find some Democrats, Republicans. I found both. I found supporters of Connor Lamb, John Fetterman, Mehmet Oz, some others. But I also got a contingent of voters who were angry that I was asking. I got, you know, typical non-voters. You run into people who don't vote or they're not familiar or whatever reason. But this was one of the first times I'd gone to a parking lot, talked to people, and found a group that just said, why would I bother doing that? And their voices were sort of angry. Their posture was, who cares? Why? The system is failing me. And I think that helps explain a little bit of why Michael is right that it is about the way the parties have kind of polarized and they're going to the polls, but I also think the people are just really pissed off. They're really angry about what's going on, and they don't feel like anyone can help them. I mean, they tried it with the Trump administration, then they switched. They handed power in Washington to Democrats, and now inflation has gone rampant. People are really unhappy with their lives. So I think that contributes a little bit to this phenomenon, too.
You get the same sense?
There are a lot of push.
So we're going to defund the police and disarm you. That's how it works now. Sorry. And then Joe Biden got to the main point of his speech, which is that people who criticize his immigration policies are responsible for the violence you saw in Buffalo. Here's the President of the United States explaining that.
A hate that through the media and politics, the internet, has radicalized, angry, alienated, lost, and isolated individuals into falsely believing that they will be replaced, that's the word, replaced, by the other. And I condemn those who spread the lie for power, political gain, and for profit.
So you lock the country down, lock kids out of their schools for 2 years, force them to get, quote, educated on the internet, but it's someone else's fault that they're, quote, alienated. They've been hearing about the Great Replacement Theory. You've heard a lot about the Great Replacement Theory recently. It's everywhere in the last 2 days, and we're still not sure exactly what it is. Here's what we do know for a fact. There is a strong political component to the Democratic Party's immigration policy. We're not guessing this. We know this, and we know it because they have said so. They've said it again and again and again. They've written books on it, and monographs, and magazine articles. They've bragged about it endlessly. They talk about it on cable news constantly. And they say out loud, we are doing this because it helps us to win elections. That's not something that's said once. It's something they've gloated about again and again and again. And we think that's wrong. And in case you doubt us, here they are.
Blue wave is African American. Yeah! It's white, it's Latino, it's Asian Pacific Islander. It is made up of those who've been told that they are not worthy of being here. Yeah! It is comprised of those who are documented and undocumented.
In a couple of presidential cycles, you'll be on election night. You'll be announcing that we're calling the 38 electoral votes of Texas for the Democratic nominee for president. It's changing. It's going to become a purple state and then a blue state because of the demographics.
The demographics of America are not on the side of the Republican Party. The new voters in this country are moving away from them. And instead, they're moving to be independents or to even vote on the other side.
An unrelenting stream of immigration, non-stop. Non-stop. Folks like me who were Caucasian of European descent, for the first time in 2017, will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America. Absolute minority. Fewer than 50% of the people in America from then and on will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength.
So you play clips of them saying it, and you're the deranged conspiracy nut.
Is he going to get a benefit? Basically, a third of the vote is going to come from Western Pennsylvania. That's one of the things that we want to keep an eye on. So again, we've got mail-in votes coming in here only from one county in Western Pennsylvania.
Kids that even traveling all the way from Honduras to Guatemala to the border, they found the buses and the planes to be even more terrifying than that entire journey.
Yeah, just the fear of the unknown. Brian, really eye-opening. I want to bring in Robert Sherman, our correspondent who is at the border. Robert, you're really at the starting line for many of these migrants, this excruciating journey that they take just to get to that point, and then they get shipped off to these different places. Do they have any idea what they're in store for once they get here?
Well, you know, Marty, it's interesting. You talk to a lot of these migrants, and they all know where they want to go. Most everyone says it's a city such as Houston or Dallas or Miami or Atlanta, Chicago. They know where they want to get to in the United States, mostly to link up with friends and family. They don't know what the process ahead is like. We ask them that question, they say they know that they want to seek asylum. They know that they want to go through that process. They don't know what that entails. They don't know what the other processes going forward would look like once they enter the United States, or how they're going to get to a final destination or anything like that. It is amazing that most of them we talk to, they really don't know what the future holds for them.
Right, and they end up in somewhere like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then what? They don't know anybody there. There is a call, as you know, Robert, for transparency. Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, was there at the border today. Did you get any indication? Did he address these migrant planes in this issue?
No, he did not. We tried to get that question into the secretary today, but we're unable to. For the most part, he focused on the fact that they're trying to increase personnel and they're trying to work with other countries to stop more people from coming into the United States, give them more reason to stay in Central and South America, but no clarification today on this specific aspect of the story.
Right, and what happens if 42 lifts and we've got this surge? Brian, if these flights are not new, they're not illegal, there's nothing nefarious going on with them, it's not really a secret that they're happening, then why would they be asking you to leave? Why would they cordon off that area of the airport so that you and others can't see what's happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's what a lot of governors are calling on the federal government to do, is to be more transparent, to just give information. Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, his spokeswoman put out a statement today saying that they have sources saying that, yes, these flights are coming to Jacksonville. They just want the federal government to be open about the fact that they are arriving, where the migrants are going. And there's another side to this, too. You know, not knowing where these facilities are, where all these kids are, you know, people want to know so that they can keep an eye on the facilities, make sure they're doing the right thing, make sure they're treating the kids the right way. And when we don't even know where they're going, it's almost impossible to do that.
Right. Well, and the other issue, Brian, as you know, is the system in Texas is overburdened, in Arizona as well. So these border cities that just can't handle the influx, they head to these other states. But on the flip side, you've got a growing rally call from state legislatures in Florida, in Pennsylvania, in many of these other states who are going, all right, you've got these planes landing, what do we do? What more are you hearing about what they're saying about their state's role in all of this?
Yeah, and you make a good point. I mean, when you think about it, and we've spent, a couple of days out here just watching the flights over and over, it makes sense. Cities like this, El Paso, they can't handle the surge of migrants coming in. They've got to fly them out to other parts of the country. They can't all just stay here, so that makes sense. But yeah, the other states, Pennsylvania, Florida, we've talked to lawmakers in both of those states. They want more information. They want the government to tell them when are the flights arriving, who's on the flights, and where are the people going.
Right. I mean, just something as simple as how many kids we need to get them into school somewhere to be able to prepare for that. Brian, I know you're on it. We'll continue to follow it closely. Robert, one thing that a major development.
But if you come in Philadelphia itself, Trump was blown out. Not a ton of Republicans there, and the Republicans that are there, again, are your urban and then close-in suburban Republicans are the ones who revolted against Donald Trump. But when you move over here, Montgomery County, you see Trump got 36%. You come up to Bucks County, Trump got 47%. There are a lot of traditional Republicans in the suburbs around Philadelphia. Again, you know it well, Jake, you grew up there. And these are the Republicans who made George H.W. Bush and George W.
This is a campaign that had no business being at this point, right? The money, the resources, they were a fraction of the other two frontrunners, Barnett, Oz and McCormick. These were mega-rich campaigns that had spent months bashing each other on the air, Chris. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I'm just going to let you, we're going to come back to you. I'm going to let them do the national anthem there. I don't want to put you in that situation while everyone salutes the flag there. We will come back to Dasha Burns in Elizabethtown in just a second. Let's go now to NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who's live in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. He's been tracking that.
And Chuck Schumer is a federal official. He is the leading Democrat in the United States Senate. And he is calling for media censorship. Now, there was a time, like maybe 18 months ago, and that would be considered a direct violation of the First Amendment. Now, we hear it every day. Let's throw them in jail. We wanted to hear more from Chuck Schumer about this. We invited him on the show tonight, as we always do. And because he is a coward, this is the only media appearance, probably in history, he's turned down. But we upgraded. Shelby Steele is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and the writer of What Killed Michael Brown. Shelby Steele joins us tonight. Mr. Steele, thanks so much for coming on. As noted, I think
will vote yes on Senate 2687, the Strengthening Oversight for Veterans Act. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Garbarino near Brooklyn, I inform the House that Mr. Garbarino will vote yea on S2687.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Representatives Karen Bass, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Pramila Jayapal, and Ro Khanna, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on S2687.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Cawthorn of North Carolina, Mr. Brooks of Alabama, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on 2687.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bishop of Georgia, I inform the House that Mr. Bishop will vote yes on S2687.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Iowa?
If you could only eat one thing the rest of your life, what would it be?
Easy. Buffet.
Pretty. Mehmet Oz here, who has a real shot to pull out this win tonight. I was consistently getting, number one, Donald Trump's endorsement, or number two, these were low information voters that frankly were exposed to Mehmet Oz for 10, 20 years because of his presence on the television airwaves. That is the question as we're heading into these final hours here in which we're watching these results come in, is just the extent to which Kathy Barnett was able to make inroads.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much. Let's go back to Dasha Burns, who's at that Kathy Barnett election night event. Dasha, I think the national anthem's done. So there has been this incredible surge for Barnett. She did not have the endorsements. She did not have the money. She doesn't, maybe it's worthwhile saying what her bio is. What her claim to being a possibly good U.S. senator is, that has caught hold among the imagination of Republican voters there.
Yeah, Yeah, listen, I think a number of factors contributed to this surge we've seen from Barnett here, Chris. First, we've been in Pennsylvania for a long time, and we have seen these ads for months. Oz and McCormick bashing each other on the air, and when I talk to voters about that, that seems to have turned into turning voters off of both of them. Voters heard the messages and said, you know what, I don't know if either of these guys is right for Pennsylvania. They see both as outsiders. They see both as mega rich and maybe not able to relate. And for months, as I've been talking to voters, I've kind of had the sense that people are looking for a third option. And listen, we actually talked to Barnett back in February, and I was struck by what she told us about what she was hearing in these rooms, which is the same thing that we were hearing when we were talking to voters on the ground here. She said she warned the Republican establishment. She said she was warning the insiders that something else was happening. This is back in February, early February, and turns out she was onto something, a fraction of the money. And here she is right now today. She's walking into a round of applause, a room full of supporters. And Chris, this is a candidate who made her name in the Republican Party on claims of election fraud, including in her own election. She ran for Congress back in 2020 in a heavily Democratic district, and she had claimed for months that she lost because of voter fraud. You mentioned early in the show that we reported, NBC News was first to verify images of her on January 6th at the Capitol, marching alongside known members of the Proud Boys. So this is someone who has been to the Stop the Steal rally. Here's what's interesting, though, Chris. Last night we went to an event of hers where when she talked about the 2020 election, instead of emphasizing that she lost because she believes there was voter fraud, instead she was pointing out the fact that she lost, but she lost in her district by a smaller margin than Donald Trump did, saying she was able to pull over some voters. And this morning when we caught her at the polls, I asked her, you know, what she says to voters about the process. Can they trust it? And take a listen to what she told us this morning. Can the voters you're asking to turn out for you today trust this process and trust in the results of this primary?
You know what? We all have such a wonderful opportunity. Only in America, not only in America, but in America, we get to decide. And so for every single Pennsylvanian, the way you can, you know, be a part of this process is make sure you're here. Make sure you're coming out and voting. Don't allow anything to discourage you. Every single Republican, you need to be at these polls today, and you need to make sure that your voice is heard. And I'm so excited.
So we've certainly seen a bit of a shift in messaging from Barnett on that process of voting, of casting a ballot. And as Kornacki said, we do expect that most of her vote will happen day of here, not mail-in, not early. They're going to come in the next couple of hours here, hopefully, Chris.
Sensation along the path the box traveled down the embankment. And another factor supporting this time frame was the autopsy report. The medical examiner said there was.
Congressman Madison Cawthorn is hoping a last-minute Trump endorsement could push him to a win. Our special primary edition of All In continues right after this.
Do your eyes?
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So that, what's the phrase they use on TV? Hotly contested Senate primary in Pennsylvania.
After the crash. Another clue the crash could have been purposeful, Boeing has not issued any safety directives for other airlines flying the plane in the wake of the tragedy. Following the news, it was not a mechanical failure. Boeing shares were up 6% in afternoon trading. Boeing declining to comment, referring all questions to Chinese regulators. Marky Martin, News Nation, Dallas.
Devastating revelations. All right, after gruesome fighting, the battle for Mariupol in eastern Ukraine appears to be over. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers have evacuated a steel plant, and they are now in Russian custody, marking the end of a months-long bloody battle for that city. The fall of the eastern port city to Russia is one of the first major wins for Vladimir Putin since the beginning of the war. After months of the invasion and war, thousands of people have died. Mariupol is largely in ruins tonight. Some chilling new details in the deaths of 2 young girls from Delphi, Indiana, that have remained a mystery for more than 5 years now. The search for the killer and a murder scene now believed to have been staged. We've got some new details for you next here on Prime. Also, a series of unidentified objects no one can seem to explain, but now after 50 years, maybe some answers. What was said today in a rare and public hearing by Congress?
When researchers were able to discover
who were serving Capitol Hill not wanting Madison Cawthorn back.
You know, if you had gone about the last 2 years trying to blow up your political viability, you could not have done a better job than Madison Cawthorn has done. I'm just looking down the bill of particulars here. He's been stopped 3 times by the police since October. He's been stopped by the TSA at checkpoints at airports with guns.
Right. Oh, I believe it was 1 gun and then a loaded magazine the first time.
Okay,
Yeah.
I take your point. He's been photographed in women's lingerie.
If only he had gotten that out in
He's
time.
been he's been photographed in sexually indiscreet or concerning videos. And maybe the thing that got him in the most trouble is that they had a redistricting, and he was going to go run in another district, and then they changed the district, and he had to go back to his district and say, oops, never mind, I really want to be representing you people. And as was just pointed out, the incumbent Republican senator of North Carolina, Tom Tillis, is not only actively opposing him, his super PAC has put $1.5 million into the race, saying that he's an embarrassment and a disaster. Other than that, it's been smooth sailing. For
but here's the worst thing, I think, worse than all the stuff you were just talking about, is that he accused his colleagues of participating in sex orgies and using cocaine. And that was it. And Kevin McCarthy had to call him into his office, the Republican leader, and say, what is this about? And then he backed down and admitted that he had been lying. But that was the moment, I think, the dam broke, because
in Washington,
he was talking
I'm not sure,
about
though,
them.
in North Carolina.
Right, in Washington, that was it.
Yeah.
They were all
Although it does seem
opposed
like
to
he has alienated a lot of the people who supported him the first time around when he ran. A lot of people who have strong ties in North Carolina who made calls to their friends saying, "Hey, look, this is a guy you can."
Now remember when he burst on the scene, he was an interesting story. He was a young guy. He had overcome an accident. And there was a lot of interest in him. But this has turned into Madison Cawthorn's excellent adventure.
He also
he's made a folly of this. And as you point out, once you accuse your colleagues, that's like a red line. They'll tolerate almost anything. But not that.
Right.
It was also interesting. I mean, early on when he was running, and even after he got elected, he was talking about reaching over across the aisle. He was sort of saying a lot of things which sounded like he was critical of the rhetoric coming out of Washington at the time he was elected, and then that went away.
He's a profoundly unserious person, and that's become apparent. I mean, even in a place where not everyone is a huge historic figure, he really stands out for the frivolousness of his behavior.
Interestingly enough, Donald Trump just came out and said we should give him a second chance. It appears that the voters in the 11th District of North Carolina may not give him a second chance. And this is one case where an incumbent might go down. And I think that the North Carolina Republican Party and the Republican Party nationally would breathe a huge sigh of relief.
Absolutely. Well, and he discovered, I think, you say he started out seriously, you think?
Well, I said he was a person of interest.
Interest.
Yes.
Then he started hanging out with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Gates, and you could see what was happening, which is he was part of that in crowd, and they were pro-Trump all the way, and that is probably the only reason Donald Trump endorsed him. Yes. And there are lots of people in the Trump circle who thought it was crazy. Why would you do this? And Donald Trump's only reason is that he believed in the big lie and talked about it.
Well, he may be part of the out crowd now.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of uncertainty hanging over the very competitive GOP Senate primary in Pennsylvania. We're standing by for more results from that state and in all the key races.
He had a new lease on life. He had traveled the world. He was also recently engaged. But on November 30th, 2021, everything changed. Correspondent Nancy Liu is joining us live tonight in California. Nancy, Beau's fiance claims that the last thing he did was reach out to authorities for some help.
Yeah, sending a 911 text said to be sent through the Uber app. This 7-Eleven on Ventura Boulevard is said to be the last place Beau Man was seen before he suddenly vanished. He's supposed to get married next month, and now he's been missing for nearly 6 months.
I can't wait for you to come see me. Next couple weeks, you'll be here. We'll have a great time. I love you.
39-year-old Beau Man seemed healthy and happy late last year, engaged to marry his longtime partner after dating long distance for about 5 years. According to LAPD, Beau was last seen at this 7-Eleven store in Studio City on the afternoon of November 30th. Fiancé Jason Abate believes Beau was picking up items for his apartment after returning from a trip. And as CEO of Sober Grid, a support network for fellow recovering substance abuse addicts, he had a busy week ahead. But sometime after the store, Jason says Beau texted 911 during an Uber ride, supposedly from Studio City to Santa Monica. Friends and relatives haven't heard from him since late November.
We're dealing with someone who's just vanished. I mean, something has happened to him, and I can assure you he's not voluntarily missing. I know Beau so well, and there has to be some rationality behind this. It just doesn't make sense.
Now, Uber tells NewsNation that the November 30th trip with Beau Man ended with no incident reported, referring further questions to law enforcement. We will be speaking with LAPD's Missing Persons Unit tomorrow. Marnie?
A mystery. All right, Nancy, and make sure you tune in tomorrow night. Nancy's going to be speaking with Beau's fiance, Jason, about what he has uncovered in the search to find Beau Man. Again, that's tomorrow night on Prime, right here at 7 Central. All right, we've got some graphic new details tonight in an unsolved murder case that has frustrated police, family, and friends, anyone involved, and just about all of those who have followed the case, including us. Best friends Abigail Williams and Liberty German were killed in February 2017 when they went for a hike on a sunny afternoon in the small town of Delphi, Indiana. It has been 5 years and there have been no arrests and no official suspects either. Today, though, we learned the FBI thought that they had their man just weeks after the girls were murdered. Correspondent Kelly Beeson is here with a major update in this case for us tonight. Kelly.
That's right. And these new details come from an affidavit filed by the FBI, Marnie, in order to obtain a search warrant. The document is from March 17th, 2017, just a month after the murders, but contains a trove of information that had only been rumored until now.
A month after the murders of Libby German and Abby Williams in Delphi, Indiana in 2017, the FBI pointed the finger squarely at Ronald Logan, the man who owned the property where the bodies were found. In a request for a search warrant of Logan's property, obtained by the Murder Sheet podcast and provided to NewsNation, the FBI says, quote, "There's probably cause to believe that Ronald Logan has committed the crime of murder, and evidence of that could be found on his property." 2 days after the murders, Logan took a NewsNation reporter to the location where the bodies were found.
This is my backyard. My backyard just happens to be bigger than most people. How many people have a murder committed at their home in their backyard?
Logan has since died and was never officially named a suspect in the case. 14-year-old Libby and 13-year-old Abby went for a walk along the Monon High Bridge on February 13, 2017. Their bodies found the next day, downhill from that area. The new redacted documents reveal many previously unconfirmed details, including that the bodies appeared to be moved and staged. Investigators located unknown fibers and unidentified hairs at the scene. Also, that at least one article of clothing was missing. and the body showed no visible signs of a struggle or fight. The type of weapon used is redacted, but there was, quote, a large amount of blood. Anya Kane and Kevin Greenlee run the Murder Sheet podcast.
The fact that there was a great deal of blood on the killer raises other questions, namely, how could he have escaped from the crime scene without being seen if he had blood on him?
Investigators had previously released an image of the man believed to be the killer, and later a short video clip Libby recorded on her phone. The affidavit says the total video is 43 seconds long, showing the man following the girls on the trail with those chilling words coming near the end. Also, two former girlfriends of Ronald Logan's claimed he had been physically violent with them in the past.
One, in fact, said that when she was watching the news, she saw the image and basically thought that they were looking for Ron Logan.
The search warrant was executed on March 7, 2017, and now 5 years later, no charges in the case.
So one can assume perhaps that they didn't find anything on that search.
Now, according to this affidavit, the FBI established a database for tips in this case, 15 of them from citizens as well.
Form in the universe, and now we have video evidence proving that. Like, that's not a huge thing. It seems like one to me.
Yeah, and you know, I think that in the last, well, my encounter was almost 18 years ago.
Yes.
And so that's when we started to develop really high-level sensors, both radar and FLIR, forward-looking infrared, that we could track, capture and track these objects. And it's happened on the West Coast, it's happened on the East Coast, and I don't know if there's, other nations that have captured these objects as well. And so it's very interesting, but I'm glad it's being acknowledged by the Pentagon and Congress. It's very important.
Well, I agree.
Sleepnumber.com.
There's a misconception. 5 things you need to hear in under 5 minutes. Listen.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island and the Honorable Mr. Richard Neal of Massachusetts, and pursuant to House Resolution 8, I'd like to inform the House that Mr.
W stands for white. William Bishop was a white man.
Explains a lot.
Like what?
So please, before it's too late,
the best possible position on the green.
Look at this. Look at our Stanford freshman. She gets the best possible tee shot you can get. Katie Kearney into Tiki.
Government work, am I right? How?
On premise.
Here's the ownership structure.
So what you look for in a race like this is there any kind of geographic pattern that if you're Lamb, you could look at and say, hey, my votes are still to come. And the problem is, again, we talked about this, they've got a shared Western Pennsylvania base. Here's Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh area. They share it as a home county. And again, we've got a ton of vote that's come in there, and Fetterman is winning big in their shared base. So then the question becomes, and you see throughout Western Pennsylvania, you see Fetterman also doing well there. So then you move to the eastern part of the state, and specifically these Philadelphia suburbs that produce a ton of votes. Is there really any difference that we're seeing there in terms of Lamb's strength? So let's take a look at Montgomery County. This is one of the biggest right outside Philadelphia. No, looks very similar to Allegheny. Go north here. Take a look at Bucks County. Similar story. Let's go into what we've got from Philadelphia so far. Philadelphia, actually, this is Kenyatta's home area here, so he's actually leading in the vote here, followed very closely by Fetterman, and then Lamb a distant third here. So again, you're primarily looking at mail-in ballots here in this Democratic primary, but we talked about the disparity. Mail-in ballots could end up accounting for half of all the votes cast in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania. So for Fetterman to be running up these kinds of numbers from west to east and in between in the middle of the state too, that's a substantial lead that Fetterman has built there over Lamb, and you just can't look at that map and immediately see, hey, here's the place where Lamb could turn it around. Like I said, this is mail voting. We still have the votes from today that'll be counted up. We will see if there's been some dramatic shift in the same-day vote. That's what it would take for Lamb to get into this. Otherwise, Fetterman's in great position right here. I draw your attention to the mail-in ballots for another reason, though, because let's compare. They're counting up the votes in these counties theoretically at the same rate, but let's take a look at some of these differences here. Montgomery County, I mentioned, one of the giant suburbs, one of the giant suburban counties right outside of Philadelphia. Look at the total number of votes. This is mail. The total number of votes they've counted up here so far, 23,000 plus 14,000 plus 5,000. That's over 40,000 votes have been counted up in the Democratic primary so far in Montgomery County. They're going through the mail. Take a look at